So the second period that we're going to be talking about when we look at the art of the ancient Greeks is a period that we refer to as the Orientalizing period. So this is a period in history that was roughly 700 to about 600 before the Common Era. And the Orientalizing period is, well, the name, let's start there with the title, Orientalizing. When we think about this term today, I think we tend to think of a much farther eastern location than is really intended by this description. When we think of the Orient, we tend to think of China and much farther east here, really, than what we intend to refer to. The Orientalizing period is a period in history where the ancient Greeks were influenced by art from Egypt and also from the Near East. So we're talking about, Assyrians and Persians, etc. And so when we're looking at this period in history, one of the things that we see is that Greek art is heavily influenced by the things that they see around them from these other members of cultures and societies around the surrounding the Aegean. So we're going to be taking a look specifically at painting. Now, unfortunately, we don't really have any surviving examples of real Greek painting, as in painting on panel or on other surfaces, other than a few surviving frescoes here and there, an occasional mosaic. What we do have, however, is pottery. And pottery, while it's not really completely analogous to what painting probably looked like in the ancient Greek world, painting does at least give us some idea of conventions, of technique, of style, of means of representation, and so it does give us some understanding of what painting was probably like during these periods in ancient Greek history, though few of the original works that we would really today talk about as paintings survive. When we look at pottery from this period in history, we tend to see some interesting things, though. We tend to see very exotic imagery, composite creatures. And again, this is nothing new. We've seen this in the Near East and in Egypt. But we also see that figures begin to push out of their registers. We have, of course, when we look at ancient Egyptian art, other than the Amarna period, a tremendous sense of stoicism and rigidity. But in Greek art, we tend to see that those boundaries get pushed. When we look at this example here, this first example of pottery, this is a Proto-Attic amphora dating from about 675 to 650 BCE, and it's quite large. It's 56 inches in height. And this is a great example of what we refer to again as this Orientalizing period. You can also see, by the way, that this vase it is somewhat fragmentary. You can see some kind of plain areas, unadorned, and these, of course, are artists' reconstructions of the form of the vase, just intended to fill it in so we have an idea of how it would have looked in its original condition. Again, it would have been founded fragmentary and broken and then reassembled and restored. But when we look at the top of this, in particular on the top and the neck of this amphora, we can see a really pretty fascinating scene. If we look here, in this detail, what we're looking at here is a scene from a very famous story. This is the blinding of Polyphemus. Polyphemus, of course, was a famous cyclops. And you can, of course, probably guess that if that's Polyphemus, then the guy holding the spear must, in fact, be Odysseus. And so this is, indeed, a scene from the Odyssey. This example here also includes some references, images of the Gorgons. We see fighting animals. We see a variety of different things. You can see some of these beasts here. But what we see happen here is that rather than the traditional set of registers, some of these figures start to push out of those boundaries. We do still see some conventions here related back to, for example, hierarchical scale, with certain figures being larger. Although in this case, Polyphemus was, of course, a massive, enormous cyclops. So he's rendered as large just simply because of the fact that he would have been very big. But some of the things that we see here in terms of style are a lot more akin to Minoan art. If we think back to, for example, the bull leaping fresco and the manner in which those figures are rendered, it's quite more reminiscent of what we see here when we look at these Greek men than what we might expect to see when we look, for example, at Egyptian art. So when we take a look at sculpture, when we talk about Greek Orientalizing sculpture, we also see some influence, which is pretty clearly from Egypt and other locations around the Aegean. Again, date-wise, time frame-wise here, we're still talking about 700 to 600 BCE. And again, we're talking about a period in time where the Greeks were really heavily influenced by contact with Egypt and the Near East. This period in history also shows us the earliest works by the Greeks that are fairly large scale done in stone. Among these, one of the best known examples of this image here, this is known as the Lady of Auxerre. And Auxerre, by the way, refers to the French town where this statue was kind of not really discovered, but it's its oldest known recorded location. We know it was there. But obviously it's not its original provenance. More than likely, this is in fact from Crete. And it's a good example of a style which we refer to as Daedalic. And Daedalic refers to the legendary artist Daedalus. And that name means the skillful one. And he was kind of a very legendary artist in a lot of ways. Of course, he was attributed this work in particular and the style of work, but he's also attributed a lot of rather interesting achievements, including the building of the labyrinth on Crete, the design of the temple at Memphis in Egypt, and all sorts of things. And so that's, again, that in this case, the term Daedalic does not really mean that we attribute this work to Daedalus by any means, but it does refer to the style of work that we see here. So this image is a female, either a goddess or a standing woman. We don't know exactly what its intended content is in that respect. But she doesn't wear a headdress. Her hand is raised almost as if in prayer. So more than likely, this is a standing woman, a worshiper, a kore figure. We have this simplified geometric form, the triangular head, stylized hair, narrow waist, geometric patterning. And this also, again, owes a lot of stylistic influence to the ancient Egyptians.